We've just seen the body of David Blakely at Hampstead Mortuary.
David?
I understand you know something about it.
I am guilty. I'm rather confused.
I shamefully wasn't familiar with her story at all. I possibly knew her name, and that's kind of the extent of my understanding. But everyone that I brought it up to, of an older generation, not only knew her story, but immediately had a very emotional, evocative response to it. And so I've understood increasingly, I think, throughout the process of research, what a loss it is to not be more familiar with this case, considering the implications, the repercussions it had on our judicial system, but our society as a whole. And I think it's kind of, unfortunately, not that surprising that it's not taught in history lessons and not as much common knowledge for younger generations, because as with so many women's stories, it's been neglected. I think people want to think of situations like this, cases like this, as being so detached from our present society, like a safe distance, that we can't possibly be culpable. But the reality is that it's so recent. And I mean, they knew at the time that it was a miscarriage of justice. So in that sense, they were kind of contemporary enough to understand the misogyny that was at play. So it shouldn't have happened then. Thankfully, it couldn't happen now. But the way that our judicial systems treat women, I think, is not improved or is in decline. We still very much need to challenge how our judicial systems treat women, but also, devastatingly, the domestic abuse statistics are horrendous. It's a national crisis, and in the UK it's considered an epidemic. So as much as we wish that was such a long ago time and we've progressed so much since then, I think the numbers will tell us that we have a lot further to go. Yeah, and I think when you're doing a period piece that's set in the 50s, you really feel like it's a stretch of research. And so when you start to realize the similarities that are at play as a contemporary woman, I was 29 when I filmed this, Ruth was 28 when she was killed, to realize how many parallels there are with the way society views and treats women, and especially in the UK, the way we still clutch at this hierarchical class system was frightening. I think I wasn't surprised at the extent that misogyny played a role in this trial. I was surprised that it was allowed to be carried out in broad daylight with a vast audience. I think you always hope that there will be more people to step in and prevent this from being carried through, and an action being taken where misogyny is the driving force. And so it's really horrifying to see when it is allowed to be carried out. And this is just one example of that. And so I think we really have to be very, very careful to make sure that that's an example that we learn from. It's a desperately costly lesson to learn, but the least we could do is learn from it. I think it's impossible not to draw parallels, because that is society that was very, very recent. That is generations that have raised us. So there's no way that we have just extricated ourselves from that tone, that attitude. I think misogyny is so deeply woven into the fabric of our society. We live in a world that is built by and for men to benefit them. And so I think it's strenuous to understand the extent that we have to overturn and be mindful of that needs changing, but it needs to be very, very proactive. It was really a kind of complex dynamic to figure out with those characters, but I was really grateful to be working with an actor like Laurie Davidson. He was so willing to find the light and dark moments of David Blakely that allows an audience to understand why she would be drawn to him, how she was able to feel safe with him, and then he would find these moments of real cruelty that could be missed by someone sitting at the very same table as them. But as the audience, we are, in that eye line, we are able to experience Ruth's experience, and it was so informative and kind of illuminating of what that can be like. And I think our intimacy coordinator, Sophie Cooch, was the kind of savior on this project as well, because she allowed us to explore the full depths of that and feel safe and be able to talk about the extent of it, because obviously it is a problem that, and a devastating issue that is still very much present tense. So it's not something that you can feel at least relieved to leave in 1955 in the context of a period piece. It's really rattling and disturbing to know that this is a contemporary issue that is unresolved. So it was really necessary to have someone qualified to talk about that with. I think it would have been different because of things like social media. So we have more resources and kind of outlets to make our voice known and for that collective to spread. So you can have international kind of outcry, and that put pressure on a government or a body of people. I think for that reason, for accountability, it wouldn't be allowed to play out, but I know that there are elements of the patriarchal society, therefore the misogynistic society that we still live in, the classism that is still very, very present and heavily weighs on UK politics and society, that would have it be kind of closer and less contrasting, if that makes sense. So it would be kind of too close for comfort, but the accountability that social media offers would at least prevent it from happening. It's so hard to answer because every piece of research is still from a third party, and even when it's interviews with Ruth from her prison cell, her waiting cell, she was conscious of the way that she was perceived and wanted to be perceived. She was so determined to continue this this feeling that she could handle anything and everything, as she had done her whole life, her whole life. So even that, she would have been conscious in the way she answered things, to not let people in completely. So it's hard to know, but I think when it became clear that her son wasn't going to be looked after in the way that she had set up in her absence, that kind of brought crashing down any sense of stability that she had, that she was leaving behind a kind of care and a structure for him. And I think that perhaps made everything much more real for her. But yeah, it's difficult to say. This role affected me more than I could possibly have prepared for or anticipated, and it was so surreal filming those moments, because you yearn for a different outcome, and so it was so hard to put myself aside, where usually, you're doing a period piece, you step into your costume, you exit yourself, and it's a real joy and a privilege to just exist in another space and time. And with this, it was just this constant rattled feeling of what an injustice this was. Every second of it was that it shouldn't have played out this way. And to have this woman at the center of it, who was so strong, who was so unbreakably brave, considering what she was being put through, and at that point knowing that she was being made an example of. It was awful, it was heartbreaking. And Pierpoint, who was the hangman at the time, who has hanged a multitude of people, said that of all the people that he hanged, Ruth was the bravest, and just to kind of exist in that was devastating. I think what's so interesting about her is when you understand the context of the 1950s and the kind of regression that happened within that society post-war, where we started to kind of clutch at more traditional values and therefore kind of narrow the pathway of what women are allowed access to in society, you understand more and more just what a rebellion her very existence was, and what a rebellion her ambition was. She just wanted to be successful in business, financially independent, and even that alone is carving out space that you are told that you don't deserve and that is not for you. And amidst all of that, she always wanted to elevate herself out of the economic background she'd been born into and the circumstances she was born into or was living. So she always had this aspiration for a big, bright, joyful life, and the resilience that she displayed throughout her life. I think it was just, it was remarkable to learn more and more about her, and that was the most affecting element, I think, just how much she fought against every constraint that was put on her. She always had hope that things could get better, and was fervently diligent to create that for herself, that all of that was self-sourced confidence in herself, and I think that's just remarkable.